says he is declaring a national emergency to build a border wall because of what he calls an invasion from the south. The president made that declaration official this morning. The president conceding he will be sued, but is predicting success eventually. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has the story tonight from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. White House officials tell Fox News that attorneys spent weeks going through all of the ins and outs of an emergency declaration to make sure that the president would be on solid ground today. Still, he stirred up a hornet's nest. With a stroke of his executive pen, President Trump today invited what may be the biggest challenge to his executive power yet.
We're talking about an invasion of our country with drugs, with human traffickers, with all types of criminals and gangs.
In total, President Trump is looking at $8 billion to build his border wall, $1.37 billion from the DHS appropriation, $601 million from the Treasury Department's forfeiture fund, $2.5 billion from the Pentagon's drug interdiction program, including $2.2 billion that will be reprogrammed from other areas of the Pentagon, and $3.6 billion from the military construction budget. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi ripped the president for raiding the Pentagon budget to build a wall, in a joint statement saying the president's unlawful declaration over a crisis that does not exist does great violence to our Constitution and makes America less safe, stealing from urgently needed defense funds for the security of our military and our nation. The president today insisted moving the money would not hurt the military.
We had certain funds that are being used at the discretion of generals, at the discretion of the military. Some of them haven't been allocated yet, and some of the generals think that this is more important.
In making his case, President Trump today pointed to dozens of emergency declarations that never drew the type of fire he's receiving. But those declarations weren't used as a way to go around Congress on appropriations. The president also gave his critics more ammunition today when he seemed to indicate the emergency declaration wasn't necessary.
I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster. And I don't have to do it for the election. I've already done a lot of wall.
Socialist firebrand Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said she'd introduce legislation to block the president, tweeting, "Joaquin Castro, Texas, and I aren't going to let the president declare a fake national emergency without a fight." A congressional fight may be the least of the president's worries. White House officials, even the president, openly acknowledge their attempt to reprogram military money will land them in court.
They will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there, and we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake, and we'll win in the Supreme Court.
The words had barely escaped the president's lips when the ACLU announced that it would sue the president. And Democrats on the House Democrats in the House Judiciary Committee, today sent a letter to the White House saying that they wanted to investigate the president's emergency declaration and asked the White House to make officials from both here and the Department of Justice available for the hearings.
We're declaring it for virtual invasion purposes, drugs, traffickers, and gangs. And one of the things, just to finish, we have removed thousands of MS-13 gang monsters. Thousands. They're out of this country. We take them out by the thousands, and they are monsters.
In a reaction now to President Trump's declaration of a national emergency along the southern border. Jane Klebb is chair of the Nebraska Democratic Party, and I'm glad that you could join me today. Jane, your thoughts about the president's decision today? Is it dismay? Do you plan to fight it? What are your thoughts?
You know, the Democrats are clearly prepared to fight this in the courts. I think one of the big concerns is that this is a big idea coming from Trump, that we need to build a much longer wall along the border. That should be debated in Congress, and the decision on how to fund it is actually in the hands of Congress, not in the hands of President Trump. And he had 2 years where he had full control over Congress. He did not get this proposal through. So I think it's a bad idea to go down this road where you just get to declare a national emergency for something that you want done.
But in this debate, I do have a question about this, because yesterday, one of the possible candidates for the Democrats in 2020, Beto O'Rourke, he's doing an interview in which he basically says he would tear down even the existing walls. Do you fear that Democrats are walking into the situation where they're going to be labeled as a party that just wants open borders?
It's clear that you need to secure our borders, and I think you have to do that with lots of different layers of security. Some of that may be fencing and walls. Some of that's clearly new technology that the border security has developed. Some of it is our military and our police. So it has to be a combination of things. What it can't be is one person saying, this is what I want. I'm not going to go through the normal process of debate and normal process of funding, and I'm just going to do whatever I decide to do.
Come on in. Dan Clifton, Strategas partner and Director of Research. The Democrats say, when they've got a declaration of national emergency, that sets a bad precedent.
Sure.
What do you say?
Well, first, the president is moving forward on what he told the American public he was going to do. This was a priority of his. He tried to get it through Congress. He believes it's a national security justification, and he's using a precedent that's been set by previous presidents going back to 1976, including multiple times by President Obama and President Bush. The question is the scope of what he's doing. Most of those have been direct foreign affair actions. This may be a little bit more of a gray area, and that's why we anticipate that we're going to have a lawsuit filed as soon as the president declares that national emergency. Stuart, that takes it out of the political realm, puts it in the legal realm, and will allow the courts to work its way through in how to do this. And how that gets decided by the courts will ultimately decide whether the Democrats are also going to use this measure if they ever take the White House again, which is a possibility. They may try and do it for guns. They may try and do it for climate change. And they're going to see how this legal argument is presented. Let me make one point about the president, though. After the president was rebooked by the courts following the immigration restrictions he put in right when he took office, this White House has been very careful, dotting their I's, crossing their T's on any type of potential legal action. So we believe that they've been preparing for this moment for 2 months or so, and I do think that they'll have a strong legal case going into those court cases.
Well, joining us tonight to take up all of this, Heritage Foundation Senior Legal Fellow Hans von Spakovsky. Great to have you with us, Hans. Former Reagan White House Political Director, Fox Business Political Analyst, Ed Rollins. And good to have you, as well as James Freeman, Assistant Editor at the Wall Street Journal, Fox Business Contributor. Hans, let's start with you. Nancy Pelosi ignoring, if we could put up quickly a full screen here of the number of national emergencies that have been declared by presidents, of which there are 31 still active. By the way, as Nancy Pelosi talked about for the base, the Democratic base, that they'll find out what they can do with emergencies, they weren't paying attention when President Obama himself declared 12 such national emergencies. The national emergency is clearly within the power of the President of the United States.
Well, yeah, in fact, Congress passed a statute, as you mentioned, in the mid-1970s that lays out the procedures for this. And, you know, that statute leaves it well within the discretion of the president to determine what is a national emergency. And I got to tell you, I think Nancy Pelosi has lost touch with reality if she doesn't think that the huge amounts of illegal drugs coming across the border, like fentanyl, which is now the leading cause of overdose deaths in the United States, and the tens of thousands of illegal aliens constantly crossing over the border. If she doesn't think that's a crisis, like I said, she's lost touch with reality.
And losing, importantly, a political battle, because that is what this has all been about, Ed Rollins. This is a party that is coming behind, forming up behind President Trump. He is gaining before our very eyes momentum. I mentioned this is his 755th day in office. Guess how many days he's been under investigation by either committees, the FBI, or the special counsel? 755 days.
Probably another week or two before that.
We know months before that. Months before that. But the reality is that he is gaining political momentum. The party is forming up behind him. The law is on his side. History is on his side. This is looking very good for the country to have a leader who finally is emerging from what has been an assault by the left and the fake news media.
And as he gets stronger, the Democrats get weaker as they basically see who can get furthest to the left and their 20-some-odd candidates. This is a very important decision for this president to have made today, and it's obviously the wall is a critical factor in stopping an emergency. And as you said, there has been 58 times since the bill was passed in 1976 that we've had national emergencies. I actually oversaw the office, the Intergovernmental Office, when I was in the Reagan White House, which he did it 6 times, Clinton did it 17 times, Obama did it 12 times, George W. Bush did it 13 times. So it's not like there hasn't been national emergencies in the past.
And this national emergency, James, great contested debate for years now over immigration, illegal immigration, and border security. The declaration of the national emergency and the president's action, this will settle part of that debate. That is, that there will be border security. It's I think, it's just breathtaking to many that there would be a debate about a superpower, any nation, that would not be automatically defending its borders.
Well, he obviously has not been able to persuade a majority in the Congress. They don't agree at the moment, even though they may have said earlier it was a crisis. They don't agree at the moment. And so you'd like this to go through the normal legislative process. But
why would we? The normal legislative process has been a disaster. We have been watching this since 1986. When amnesty was passed, we have seen border security erode. We've seen lives devastated and destroyed by drugs that are coming across methamphetamine, marijuana, heroin, cocaine, fentanyl. The majority of those deadly drugs, 70,000 opiate overdoses a year. How can anyone in good conscience not want to control that border and stop the import of those deadly drugs alone? Forget illegal immigration, terrorists, you name it. Sex trafficking. Those deaths alone should be enough to want to secure the border for any American.
Well, I think you want to get funding the way our Constitution sets it out and get the approval of the Congress or seek to punish your opponents at the next election. I think he has an argument. The House of Representatives is probably
he has a law. It's called the National Emergencies Act of 1976, giving him that power.
I agree with you. He's on a threshold level. The inability to defend a border, to maintain the integrity of a border, does seem like national security.
Does that seem like you'd be a little concerned about a president who didn't want to protect the national sovereignty?
Well, you do have to be concerned about a precedent. We saw Bill Clinton
we've got
31 national emergencies. Do you want to expand the ability of a president to do that?
James, President Obama, of those 58 that Ed just referenced, President Obama wrote 12 executive orders. 3 orders already by this president. 31 of those executive orders over those administrations are still active, which means succeeding presidents have had to sign those every 6 months in order to keep them in effect.
Right.
This is a historical precedent. It is, without question, his lawful prerogative